Hey, welcome everybody. You see, E-Card's getting slick. We have like the lead-in music now. Thanks to Andrea for that. Hi everybody, and happy Passover week. Passover is upon us, and it's always frantic this time of year. But I think this year it feels especially unsettling to think about even trying to do Passover. I'm sure some of you are wondering, will I do Passover this year? And some of you are thinking, well, I will, but I'll be doing it with one other person or all alone. So what does that look like? And I'm sure a lot of you are just thinking, you know, I usually go to someone else's Seder, and I kind of know what it looks like, but if I had to lead a Seder, what would I do? Okay, so we're going to try and this is not going to be the deep dive exploring every nook and cranny. We're going to try to really go through the basics, give you a primer for what are the main steps of the Seder, and what are they, why are they there, what do they mean, what's the rhythm that we're trying to achieve. We booked 2 hours for this. I don't believe it, but this is like always famous last words, but I don't believe it'll take that long. But we have that time because I want to just leave time for questions throughout and at the end. Okay, so this isn't so much a class, so I won't be like kind of leading us together through interpretive learning. I'll be presenting the ideas and the material, and people are welcome to unmute themselves at any point if they have a question or see something that I'm missing. And I will miss something because the Seder is a composite of so many traditions, and that looks a little different wherever you are, depending what family you're in, depending what country you come from, depending what recipes you prefer, all that kind of stuff. So, but having said that, we're for a Jewish ritual, we're in pretty good shape in terms of ease of acquisition, because the word Seder itself, we talk about it like it's a meal, and it is. It's famously the Passover meal, but the word Seder itself means order, and that's because the meal is broken up into and ordered into very distinct parts. There are 15 of them, and in some ways, it's just as simple as that. We'll just move from part to part, but of course, it's important for us to know what the parts are. Most haggadot will have that list for you, but it'll look a little strange until we unpack it together. Any questions before we begin? Okay, so here's some more good news, which is that I'm going to ask Andrea to post a couple of PDFs. We're as sort of source material for this session. We put together, Rabbi Brous put together a kind of an ingredients list, and I put together a Seder guide. And we're going to give both of those to you as PDFs here. And I'll refer to them. I'll be kind of screen sharing, referring to them, but they're also for you to refer to yourselves. Maybe some of you have printers at home and can print them out. And if not, maybe some of you will have them on the screen, or just, we'll be able to review them. This is like this is alongside your haggadah. This is supposed to be a real clear and easy primer for the Seder. So let me start and just show you these things, because I think they turned out really nicely, and they're really pretty straightforward. This is something Rabbi Brous put together, and it is just the ingredients for your Seder table. Now, the sort of the most iconic image of the Seder table is the Seder plate, right? This is mine right here. I'm nervous to have it out, right? Because it's near, it feels like it's not supposed to come out until Wednesday. It's like going to get some dust, not a grain particle on it. But the Seder plate, and the Seder plate is a kind of presentation. It's almost like a teaser for the rest of the night. It's there. It's almost like an album cover, or like kind of highlights. This is what you're going to see over the course. It doesn't really get used. The Seder plate is there as a kind of a demonstrative piece. But it has, and different ones have different spaces, but it has at least 6 spaces. I've got the lettuce, the haroset, the egg, the bitter herbs, the shank bone, and the parsley. So some of those things that you might place depending on what your Seder plate looks like. But here are just some of the basic ingredients that you're going to need, both for that Seder plate and for the Seder itself. Matzah. Matzah is probably the most important food item of Passover, and it in some ways is Passover. Like eating matzah and not eating bread is our primary act of celebrating Passover. And you'll need 3 of them, 3 pieces for your Seder. Now, I don't want everything I say is in the you know, with the great caveat and the great understanding that we're in this really difficult situation where you may not have all of the things that you need. You may not be able to procure them. And this, you know, this is what when I say you need at least 3, it may be that you end up having 1 and you'll deal with it. Like, we're just going to have the Seder that we're able to acquire. But I'm just going to give you kind of the standard features. The other kind of primary food that it's considered really central or important to eat is maror, some kind of bitter herb. Now, I've always been surprised by the use of lettuce as the bitter herb. It seems like a completely non-bitter herb, but if you eat I've been told that the answer is that if you eat the root, near the root, it is bitter down there, and so that's why that was used. But we used horseradish in my family, and there are other traditions, but some kind of very bitter, spicy vegetable. Haroset is reminiscent of the mortar that we used to build the cities for Pharaoh in Egypt. And you know, there's the apple and cinnamon version, but my brother makes a different version every year. If you start Googling this, you'll come up with all kinds of wild, spicy, Persian, all over the world, different haroset recipes. So that's something that you can experiment with, but that will play into the Seder, and there's even like a space for it on the Seder plate. And egg is a classic item on the Seder plate, and usually starts the meal. And here, I said that matzah and maror were the 2 major food items, and the other major food item is not real. It's not real. How about that? That is to say, the other food item is the paschal lamb, the shank bone here, the zroa. I think Rabbi Brous put beets because it's all symbolic anyway, but because she's a vegetarian. But even the meat would be symbolic, is what she means, because we no longer sacrifice a lamb, and so we don't have a paschal lamb at the table, but that's what it represents. And then she also lists some kind of vegetable, like parsley, celery, potatoes, to be dipped in salt water as one of the phases of the Seder, which we'll get to as well, but also there's a space for it on the Seder plate, which is why she put it here. Okay, so this is, I won't spend too much time. There's a couple of extra items that we've got down here just to finish out the list. But that's just some of the basic items. Now, of course, you will probably also want an actual meal, and that, you know, you can do as you wish with that, with the understanding that bread is probably not a great item to have at this meal. But other than that, you know, matzo ball soup and things like that, and, you know, recipes are not my specialty, so we won't be spending too much time covering that here. But that's those are some of the basic items that you want to procure. And I will just say, maybe just by way of kind of getting into this, I want to say 2 kind of framing concepts, even as I begin to talk about the foods that we need and all that. Like, now that we're going to get into the Seder, I want to offer 2 framing concepts which sort of contradict each other. And one is that there's a very specific order to all of this, and that's the word. Seder means order, and that's good news. It's easy to follow along. So that's one word of wisdom, is just follow the steps, and you'll get to the end. It'll be great. But the other thing that I want to say, which I think is very important to say, and yet stands somewhat in tension with what I just said, is be loose about it, right? Like, be precise about it on the one hand, but also be loose about it on the other hand. And I mean that because I'm going to say this now, I'll say it later, and I'll say it again at the end, because I think it's the most important thing I can say, to any Passover ear. And that is, the main point of this meal is that you have an experience of telling, thinking about, processing, investigating the story of the Exodus from Egypt, and doing that is not reading it out of the Haggadah, although that may help a lot. Doing that is like trying to think about, like, wait, what were the basics and what? Okay, so I'm going to say that same thing again when we get to it, but I just believe in it so strongly, and I say it now at the outset because I want to just emphasize that, yeah, there's an order to things, and we're going to follow it, but the key is that we're creating all these rituals in order to create a space for this storytelling experience, which is a very loose thing. And so, whether we check all the boxes, or whether we tell the story exactly as we told it last year, or exactly as it's printed in the Haggadah, that's not the point. The point is that we tell the story. Okay, so order, but also keep it loose, keep it natural, keep it organic. So on that note, I guess I'll also say, somebody asked me, Rabbi, what are just the bare basics? Like, if I just need, like, nothing, just the bare minimum, what would that be? And I guess my answer would be, we'll get to this eventually, but famously, one of our rabbis says, if you do nothing else, you should mention and explain the Paschal lamb sacrifice, the matzah and what it's all about, and the maror, the bitter herb, and what it's all about, right? And then, of course, to that I would just add, and telling the story of Egypt. So that's it. Those are the basics. And the first one we already don't really do. We don't really have the Paschal sacrifice anymore. So bare bones, eat some matzah, eat some maror, tell the story of Egypt, happy Passover. Okay, so you can go home now, if you're tired of this already. Okay, and you can also go home now in the sense that, I mean, I want you to stay, but you can go home now in the sense that you can take these PDFs, print them out, and that will contain most of what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so you have what you need if you can't stay with us the whole time. Okay, having said that, let's get into it. A Seder. What is a Seder? Well, I said already that it means order, and it refers to the order that we're about to talk about, that we're about to move through. Many have suggested, speculated, asserted that the Seder is based on the form of the Greek symposium, where you have like a meal that you gather around and you talk about something important, and that may well be. But I think that the other thing that is to say, we're going to see some Greek influences actually along the way. So that's an interesting kind of model to keep in mind. But on some level, the Seder is based on two primary mandates given to us by the Torah, and one is literally that we're told in the book of Exodus, not we're, but our ancestors, although that's how we're supposed to feel, like it was us, they're told to eat the Paschal lamb together with matzah and maror on that night, right? We'll get to that verse eventually, but we're actually told to do it. So there's some concept of some eating that has to happen in this celebration. And also we're told, "V'higadat levincha," and you shall tell this story to your child. Okay, so both of those things are actually mentioned in the Torah, and therefore the kind of the core, the kernel, the primary seed for the Seder goes all the way back, though it's gone through all kinds of evolutions since then. Let's just look now at the other PDF here. I'm going to screen share it, but you can also, you've got a link to it as well, the Seder guide that I put together. And we're going to start with the Seder itself, the order itself. Okay, so here it is. And I want I'm actually going to sing a little kiddie song here. There's like there's a standard little kids song that you sing this order to, but I think it's good it helps me to remember like what goes where. And after all, this is for kids. The idea is that it's directed towards the telling towards the kids. So for those of you who have kids in the house out there, I think this will be a helpful device, but I actually think it's just like a helpful device for all of us, not just because the music helps us remember, but because it emphasizes this idea that we are following along in a Seder. So here are all of the steps, the 15 steps that we are about to go through. Rashi, actually, our great teacher Rashi, is the one who kind of broke up the Seder and labeled all the parts so that these actually became the official parts of the Seder. So the song goes, and I'm sure if you YouTubed like Seder song or Kadesh Urchatz song, it would pop up. So you don't have to lean on my version, but this is how it goes. Kadesh, I'm gonna cursor it actually so that you see where I'm at. Okay. Kadesh Urchatz Karpas Yachatz Magid Rachza Motzi Matzah Maror Korech Shulchan Orech Safun Barech Halel Nirtza. Okay, sounds like a very like little kid's song. I'm gonna sing it one more time though, just to get that in our head, because then as we go, we'll track our movement through that song. Okay, so one more time. Kadesh, and you can sing along. Kadesh Urchatz Karpas Yachatz Magid Rachza Motzi Matzah Maror Korech Shulchan Orech Safun Barech Halel Nirtza. Okay, so there you have it. Now we're going to go through that list. That's basically what we're going to do today and explain every part. That is the Seder. This is the Seder. And it begins with Kadesh. Any questions so far? Nope. Okay, here we go. Let's take a look at the first step in the Seder. And if we were singing the song, we would sing Kadesh, and then that's it, right? Okay. So Kadesh is just a different verb form for Kiddush, right? To sanctify. And we say Kiddush, this is familiar to us from Shabbat. We say it at the beginning of all of our holidays. It's a standard format. Here it's also going to count as one of the other main features of the Seder, which is the 4 cups of wine. The actual pouring of the wine is right at the outset something to remember and keep in mind. There's a tradition that we all pour wine or grape juice, totally fine, for each other. And that's the idea that we are kind of, for the purpose of the Seder, both, because we were once slaves and now we're trying to be otherwise, but also maybe some suggestion influenced by kind of Greek dining. For the duration of the Seder, we're going to be like royalty. We're going to be leisurely. We're going to lean back and kind of be served as a kind of an antithesis to the slavery experience where we were the servants. Okay, I put a question at the end of this here, which is why would royalty be the opposite of slavery instead of just freedom? Like this is not necessarily obvious or intuitive. And I just put this question there just as a way of saying, this is how we can be loose with the Seder, is every piece here is just an opportunity to think and talk and open up to the crowd and say, hey, this is cool that we're serving each other, but do we really want to be royalty? I mean, is that the model that we aspire to? Or is it, that might not be your question, but I just give it as an example of, in every one of these pieces, it's just an opportunity for discussion. Magid will be the the primary discussion point, but all of these have symbols that are worthy of investigation. Okay, so we pour each other's wine and we recite a kiddush, and I wonder if it would actually be helpful for me to recite the nusach of the kiddush, because that's a particular nusach. Let me see if there are any nodding heads. Anyone want to hear the sound of the kiddush on Passover? I see some nodding heads, enough nodding heads that I'm going to do it. So that, where is it? Screen share. I have a haggadah handy here, although it seems not so handy all of a sudden. There it is. So there is a kiddush. They have an insertion for Shabbat, which we won't need. So it begins here. It begins with Borei Peri Hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Peri Hagafen. And the tune I'm using is the nusach, the sort of the little melody that we use on not Sabbath, not Shabbat, but on holidays like Passover. So it goes like this: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol am, v'romamanu mikol lashon, v'kidshanu b'mitzvotav. Vatiten lanu Adonai Eloheinu b'ahava, moadim l'simcha, chagim uzmanim l'sason, et yom chag hamatzot hazeh, zman cherutenu, mikra kodesh, zecher litziat Mitzrayim, kivanu v'charta, v'yotanu kidashta mikol amim, umodei kodshecha, b'simcha u'b'sason, hinchaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, Mikadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Okay, that's the tune. You needn't memorize that tune. I just want to put it out there in case, and this will be recorded, so in case people want it. If you have a haggadah in front of you, it'll be right there. A kiddush can always also be, we are saying this blessing in honor of Passover. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei Peri Hagafen. Like that. Let's keep the bare bones in mind, and for some of us that'll be the most comfortable thing to do. And then, as I said, after the kiddush, there are a bunch of things here that would only apply if it was Passover was coming up right against Shabbat. But in this case, all we'll do is that we'll jump to Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. The Shehechianu blessing, which is the blessing we say at the first time we do anything in the course of a year for the first time, and this is the first time that we are having a Seder. So we say that. Now, strangely enough, we also say it on the second night, even though it's not the first time, because the whole idea of a second night, which different people have different opinions of. I happen to be a little annoyed by the whole two holidays, two Seders thing, but most people love it. But the whole idea of a second night is that in the diaspora, we are far from Jerusalem, or back in the day we wouldn't know exactly when they had set the calendar. So it could be now, it could be the next day based on the way the moon looks. So we're actually reenacting and doing the whole thing again. Now, people love their two Seders, but some of us find it a little laborious. But the point is we say Shehechianu on both nights. Okay. That's Kadesh. Any questions so far? Okay. The other just thing that I want to say about Kadesh, which is sort of obvious, but all the more important here, is that the point of every Kiddush is that it sanctifies the meal. It makes the meal a holy act. And that is generally a major move to take note of, that the rabbis speak about all the time, that since the destruction of the temple and that form of worship, now our table has become a kind of an altar of kind of like service to God. And so that our meals actually can be a form of worship, a sort of strange concept, but it applies especially on Passover when the meal is actually, the ritual is actually the sacred act, okay? So here we go. Kadesh, Urchatz, okay. Urchatz is a hand washing, but it's actually only the first hand washing. You'll notice later, this is Urchatz, and later you'll see us say Rachza. Urchatz, Rachza, same root there, and that is Rochetz, to wash. So this is the first hand washing that we do. Now, it's weird that we do 2 hand washings, and it's weird that we do a hand washing before the vegetable that we're about to eat. We make kiddush, we wash our hands, then we break bread. But here we add an extra hand washing, and we don't say a blessing over it. And there are some like loose reasons why, like you could wash before a vegetable also. But the truth is, the main reason for this hand washing takes us to an absolutely central principle in the whole, I'll say, kind of pedagogical model of the Seder, which is that we're going to ask ma nishtana. We're going to ask what is different about this night. And in order to get us to that place of noticing how different this night is, we're told by the tradition to actually make it different. So we're supposed to, some of you were on a class with me on Wednesday night when I actually read this out of Maimonides. He says that you should introduce all kinds of changes. And he gives wild examples, like you should snatch the table away all of a sudden, like really crazy stuff, so that the children will say, wait, what's going on here? And as soon as they said that, you got them, and you're asking what's different about this night? Well, here it is. It's because of Passover. So a lot of the things that we'll see, and here very prominently, we see a piece of the Seder that's actually primarily meant to create a sense that this night is different. Okay, so we do hand washing, and like the wine, people do it for each other. They wash each other's hands, but we don't say a blessing here the way we usually do over hand washing, because this is sort of just a gesture. It's sort of just a way of saying this night is different, and there's an odd hand washing that's popped up here. Now, look, I'm not 100% sure that, having a hand washing, all the kids are going to be like, what's going on here? But that's the idea. I mean, that's the premise upon which these little deviations are constructed. Okay, so that's Kadesh Urchat. Between these steps, please pop up if you have any questions. Otherwise, we will move to the next part of the Seder. So, Kadesh Urchat, Karpas. Okay, Karpas. Karpas is one of the coolest parts of the Seder, and in part it's cool because it's a little chance to eat before we have to wait for a long time before we get to eat. But in part it's cool because it's also mysterious. It's also meant to provoke questions. Not even so clear why we eat karpas. So what is karpas? Karpas is the vegetable appetizer, as we put here. It's some kind of vegetable, and there isn't a solid tradition on which vegetable to use. It's common to use parsley or celery, and we dip them into salt water, as we'll soon talk about. But some people use potatoes, which I like to use, actually, because it is this one morsel of food that you get before you go through all of the other steps, which at some Seders can take, shall we say, too long. And so you have this opportunity to eat something. Now, that might be the practical reason, but of course there are all sorts of spiritual reasons attributed to karpas. It's a sign of spring, perhaps. Like this is a spring festival. And so we're still, even though we're mostly celebrating Egypt, we're still conscious of that. And maybe that's what the vegetable is there to represent. The word, here's the first Greek influence, probably comes from the Greek and means something like raw vegetable. So that's probably where it's from. But there is a very cool attribution that Rashi is again, Rashi, the 11th century rabbi who came up with the Seder that we sing a song to. Rashi has a very cool connection, which I mentioned here at the end. The word karpas does appear in the Hebrew once in the entire Hebrew Bible. And it seems to mean something totally different. It is one of the fabrics that decorates King Achashverosh's palace. There's chur karpas v'techelet. And so Rashi notices that. And then in the Joseph story, when Jacob gives Joseph a tunic or a coat of many colors, Rashi says, oh, it was made of karpas and based on royal fineries. And based on that, the tradition has developed, and this I think is the coolest symbolism given to karpas, is that karpas is symbolic of the coat that the brothers, Joseph's brothers, who sold him into slavery in Egypt, dipped into an animal's blood to prove to their father that Joseph had been torn apart by wild animals and not, as was true, had sold into slavery by them. And therefore, it evokes the scene and the lie and the trauma, which was the beginning seed of our descent into Egypt. That, in a sense, it's at the beginning of the Seder because that's where the story really starts. Okay, so that's one example of symbolism that is almost like gathered, like a Rolling Stone gathers. Or I guess the Rolling Stone doesn't gather, right? But anyway, like, something, they played those Japanese video games where the ball rolls and gathers things. So all of these symbols gather, all of these rituals gather symbols over the year. And this, I say this one in somewhat extended fashion to give you a sense that this is also a Passover tradition to say, oh, I heard a cool thing about the karpas. When we dip it in salt water, we're dipping it in the tears of of our ancestors, lots of symbols, and we can share different symbols and we can, say what we've heard, and that's also part of the Passover experience, okay? So that's karpas for you. The karpas does get a blessing. It's Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam barei pri ha'adama, and then we're free to eat the karpas. And yeah, like I said, I like to go with the potato because it fills you up. Okay, and then we keep going. And the next few are not eating rituals, which is why I was so specific about that potato. Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz. Okay, yachatz means to hard word to say in English. To have. Not to have and to hold, but to have and to hold. There are 3 matzahs on the Seder plate, okay? And we break the middle matzah into 2. That is the ritual here. There's no blessing over it. You just do it. Now, why do we do that? And why are there 3 matzahs to begin with? So the 3 matzahs, again, you're going to run into all kinds of symbols. Oh, the 3 matzahs are the 3 patriarchs, or the 3 matzahs are Kohen, Levi, and Israel, or the 3 matzahs are, all kinds of things like that. But on a practical level, the 3 matzahs are there because we make blessings on all the holidays on 2 loaves. And since we're going to break one, well, we need 2. And so we've got 3 so that'll account. So when we make the actual hamotzi blessing, we'll make it over the 2 loaves. That tradition comes from a story in the Torah that says on Friday, it doesn't say Friday, but before the Sabbath, the manna would come down in double proportion, right? So that we have this idea that we make 2, we make a blessing over 2 loaves because that's a reenactment of that. And in general, I think you're already noticing that as we move through these symbols, sometimes they have very practical reasons, like an appetizer, but they also have symbolic and historical reasons so you can use any of those layers of analysis. Rabbi Brous, for example, suggested that yachatz here speaks to the brokenness that is part of this story, and matzah, after all, is a complicated symbol, which is at once the sort of symbol of Passover and freedom and liberation, and also the bread of affliction, right? So you can see how breaking the matzah in half could also have a kind of symbolic import to the impoverishment of the bread itself. But that's just an example. Okay, the question is, why do we break the middle matzah in half, right? I didn't say anything about that yet. So we break the middle matzah in half because one half of it is going to be, the larger piece usually, is going to be the afikomen, which we'll get to later and is a famous part of the Passover Seder. The afikomen is the bigger half of that middle matzah, which is then taken away and hidden somewhere. We'll get to that. We'll get to that process when we reveal it. But just so you know now, there are different customs. Some people the adults in the family will go and hide it, and some families it's the opposite. The kids will take it and hide it and ransom it. So there are different customs about that, but we break the middle matzah, and the larger part becomes the afikomen, and the afikomen is well, we'll speak more about it when we come to it. There's some wild theories on the afikomen, but what it stands for in our symbolic scheme is the Paschal Lamb. Remember, we don't have the Paschal Lamb, and so the afikomen becomes a kind of a stand-in for the Paschal Lamb, which was supposed to be eaten by midnight of the Seder, and so later we'll have to eat some from the afikomen before midnight, and that's so that on a basic level, that's sort of where the afikomen is servicing us ritualistically. But then it becomes just a fun part of the Seder, and we'll get to it in one of our later stages. So there you go, kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz, breaking the middle matzah. Any questions? All good so far? I'm gonna look at the comments just in case. All is well. I think that video game is called Katamari Damacy. Am I right about that? Okay, back to our regularly scheduled programming here. Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz maggi. Dun, 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 dun. This is the big one, okay? This is the whole point of the Seder. This is why we're here. Here's the verse that I mentioned earlier, and you shall tell your child on that day as follows: because of this God did for me by taking me out of Egypt. That's the language there is v'higadata, right? Like haggadah, like magid, those are all related, and that's because that's the telling of the story is the primary function of this Seder. Now, I'm going to say again what I said at the outset, which is just put your haggadah down. Honestly, truly, and I mean this, in my family, when my brother and I lead Seder, we just literally, like, we'll start, at this point, maybe we'll say a few, like, this is the bread of affliction. We'll get to some of the highlights soon. Everybody's got favorites, and I'm not telling you, you won't want to read things out of the haggadah. But soon enough, we get to a place where we just turn to the table and say either, well, okay, let's see if we can reconstruct this story. What is it about? Where does it begin? What happened in Egypt? And, it seems like a lot to ask, but the truth is most people do know, like, well, I don't know, were there plagues, And that's a good start, like, was Moses in the story? That's a good start. And together, you construct and you try and tell each other the story. And of course there are other ways to investigate the story and to ask its meaning for us. Like, this is also a time to say, many people have traditions to at the beginning of the Seder, at the beginning of Maggi, to talk about ways that we witness or experience bondage in our own lives or in our world. Like, where are we still oppressed? Where are we still constricted? Where are people in our world today still suffering from slavery? Right? These are all. That's not just like making it relevant or not getting bored. That's what this is. That's Magid. Magid is supposed to be a true discussion of the story of Egypt and its implications for us. If if you have that conversation, I think you are fulfilling the commandment a lot more than if you just mindlessly read through the Haggadah. Having said that, Haggadah is great stuff, and there are great things in it, and there are pieces that to all of us probably feel like they just must not be missed. So we've highlighted some of the classics here. I said in my class on Wednesday, and I'll just remind people because it'll be helpful as we move through some of this stuff. I said that that the Haggadah is less the story of the Exodus and more a collection of attempts to tell the story. It's a little bit more of it's a little bit more of like a greatest hits from storytelling over the ages. Let me show you what I mean soon. But here's just some opening things that we'll see in the Haggadah. I'll soon go into a Haggadah and show you. In this sheet that we linked you to, we just have some of the classics. You know, if I were to pick the things that I definitely want to say in Magid, even being a person who doesn't really want to get, you know, have my entire Seder weighted in the Haggadah. The opening of the Magid section, Ha lachma anya, this is the bread of affliction. Let all who are hungry come and eat. That feels to me like a very important moment in the Seder, where we link the idea of our own suffering to the suffering that exists in the world. And unfortunately, it's not a year where we can really fulfill this, but the idea is that we should really open our Seder table to anyone who needs a meal, anyone who needs a Seder, and all who are hungry should be able to come and dine at our Seder table. So that has, I think, great ethical and moral import, though it'll be a little hard to realize this year. Let's take a look now at the actual Haggadah. I just want to see here how we move through pieces, both so that I can highlight that we'll see the same sorts of things that we see even in our primer, but also to show you the kinds of things that you might consider skipping. Okay, so here's Magid. It's this is a wonderful website called Sefaria, which has a full Haggadah online, and though it's very traditional, it doesn't have anything, and no frills or modern gendering changes or anything like that. But anyway, here we are, and this is the bread of destitution, of affliction. We just went through that, and then the famous, and this really is essential. In some ways, I would say that the reading of Manishtana, one of the classics, and it's usually recited by the youngest person at the table who is able to recite it. So that's just a fun tradition. But it also is very, it doesn't have to be worded exactly like this, but as I said earlier, getting us to a place of asking, what's going on here? Manishtana Laila Zeh, what is different about this night, is considered by the tradition to be essential. We have to bring people to a place of inquisitiveness where they're actually curious about what's happening. And this represents that. So yeah, in a way it has to be recited, but in another way, the point is, like, can we provoke questions? Can we get people thinking? And then once we've done that, then we it's as if the way that Magid is constructed is, why is this night different from all other nights? You probably know the tune, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot, and it gets asked in a bunch of ways, a bunch of funny ways, like on all other nights, we don't even dip our food once, and tonight we dip it twice. That's like kind of a funny question. But once that question is asked, then it's like, it's on, and we can begin Magid. Oh, you asked why this night is different from all other nights? Well, let me tell you. And here is the beginning of an answer. This is maybe the most concise version of the story that we're going to get. And so if you are a real, like, Haggadah loyalist, this is the part where if you read it through, you've done the work of the Seder. We were slaves to Pharaoh in the land of Egypt, and right, this paragraph here that begins, we were slaves to Pharaoh, is sort of like a one-paragraph summary of the story. I want to just mention, as I get to this paragraph, like, this is now a footnote or a parentheses, which is that, of course, there are songs. There are songs and songs and songs and songs, right? So one of the classic songs here is Avadim Hayinu Hayinu Lefaro b'Mitzrayim b'Mitzrayim. Okay, that's a song, and if you know it, sing it. Or if you want to learn songs, sing them. That's definitely one of the customs, is to open space for singing. But if you don't know a song, don't feel like, oh, don't we have to sing Avadim? Like, don't worry about it, okay? Just move on. If you don't know the song, it's not important, but that is certainly part of the ritual as well. Okay, gonna go back to our primer soon, but I want to just give you an example of the kind of stuff that's in the Haggadah and the kind of stuff that you might say is not necessary. I want to give you some freedom to actually like pick out parts and say, this I'm going to do and this I'm not going to do. So here's an example. I showed this on Wednesday night, actually, so it's a little repetition, but an example of not the story of Egypt, but people telling the story of Egypt. So it happened once on Passover, on Pesach, that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining in Bnei Brak, and we're telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt that whole night until their students came and said to them, the time of reciting the morning Shema has arrived. Okay, that's interesting, and it really is, it's food for discussion, and look, they were telling the story too, and we could talk about that, and if you use the haggadah as a kind of jumping off point, great, but you know, look at this next paragraph. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, behold, I am like a man of 70 years, and I have not merited to understand why the Exodus from Egypt should be said at night, until Ben Zona explicated it, as it is stated, in order that you remember the day of your going out from the land of Egypt all the days of your life. The days of your life indicates that the remembrance be invoked during the days. All the days of your life indicates that the remembrance be invoked also during the nights. But the sages say the days of your life indicates that the remembrance be invoked in this world. All the days of your life indicates that the remembrance be invoked also in the days of the Messiah. It's a lot there. You know, that's like early on in the Seder, and we're like into like very intricate midrash. So like, I just want to say, that's the kind of thing, like, it's cool if you don't read that. And you, as the Seder leader, probably want to go through, and that wasn't the most demanding, the most intricate by a long shot of the passages in maggi. So just like, you know, be mindful, go through, highlight things, and unless you're a real like, and gesundheit to you if you are like, I got to read every word, I love this haggadah, because it is, you know, a wonderful work of Jewish literature, then great, but do really feel free to skip around. Okay, so speaking of skip around, here are some of the highlights. The 4 questions, right? Classic, maybe the most classic, beautiful record of rabbinic pedagogical thinking, sort of differentiated learning, 4 different kinds of people, 4 different kinds of answers. I think it's great. But again, even just going through the 4 questions, to me, that's not enough. It's more like, well, you know, like, which of these children do you identify with? And, you know, are any of us really wicked? And, you know, like that conversation, what's this really about? What's really going on? Okay, some other classics, the Vihi She'amda. Let's see if we can find that. Andrea, how do I hop from screen to screen? That's what I want to do. But here, we're going to go back to the Magid, and here's the 4 sons, and then here's some other stuff, and here's some other stuff that I didn't highlight, and then here's this paragraph, Vihi She'amda. This is a famous one to sing. Vihi She'amda, Lavotenu Velanu, Vihi She'amda. It's famous, so I'm singing it, and I'm pointing out that it's there. It is this idea that God has been with us and seen us through so many trials and tribulations, right? The language here is not only one person or nation has stood against us to destroy us, a little grim here, but in each generation they stand against us to destroy us. That is to say, in each generation we've had challenges, we've had struggles. The Passover event wasn't just once. Oppression has been part of our history, but we have persisted. So that's what Vihi She'amda is all about. And let's see, can you all see? You now can all see me? I'm back in the primer. Yeah. Okay, cool. Other classics, the plagues. We spill a drop of wine with the mention of the plagues, and this like is dipping your pinky into the cup. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't say that we fill a second cup at the beginning of Magid. I didn't say that. Okay. This is like the 4 cups. So 1 cup is Kadesh, and drunk during Kadesh, the Kiddush. And then we fill a second cup at the beginning of Magid because we'll drink it during Magid, and and we're going to be using it during Magid, specifically during this plague when we spill a drop of wine at the mention of each plague. And this, I think, is one of the most beautiful symbols to point out, which is that we take out the wine because the plagues, though they were signs of our liberation, actually caused death and destruction for Egyptians. And the idea is that we remove some of our wine so as not to ever fully rejoice when other people had to suffer. Okay, so certainly that I think is one of the most visceral kind of rituals, and also has deep meaning or import to it. Let's see if we can go back to the, let's see. Just pipe up at any point if you have questions. So this is maybe, if I'm gonna recommend you skip anything, I don't know, this is like, go out and learn what Lavan the Aramean sought to do to Yaakov our father. And then like, it goes on to give like a very intricate midrash of how the stories of Genesis actually like prefigure the story of Exodus, and you can see this here. And you can actually, and then you can read that all out through the book of Deuteronomy. It's extremely complicated and cool, but like I think this counts as part of the haggadah. Look at how it's going on and on and on and on and on. Like if you're looking to have something more digestible, I assume some of you are going to have a 5-hour Seder and really talk about every single thing. And I assume some of you are going to have a 45-minute Seder. So just like, let's try and figure out who's your audience, what can they take, what can you take, right? So it's a kind of, you're going to have to do a kind of, pulse check on your crowd. Okay, that was before the 10 plagues, but it was an example. Here's the 10 plagues, and you can see them listed separately so that you can take drops out. Then there's a tradition of of like taking drops out, not just for the plagues, but for the acronym that we use to remember the plagues, like in remembrance of how we remember, which I feel like is very Jewish. Okay, and then after that comes another section. I mentioned this one on Wednesday, where like they proved that there were actually 50 plagues. No, there were 200 plagues. There were 250 plagues, etc., 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 etc. Okay, so that's like you can see some of the stuff that's in there and how you sift through it. But don't forget the classics. There's also, of course, Dayenu, right? Dayenu. Everybody wants to sing Dayenu. Everybody loves Dayenu. Ashkenazim, Sephardim. Ashkenazim have the great tune, Ilu Hotzi Hotzianu Mi Mitzrayim. Persians have this great custom of during Dayenu, during Dayenu, they beat each other with green onions in sort of like memory of like the whipping that Egyptians would do. Sort of a strange ritual, but super fun. And I've definitely experimented with it. It feels a little funny on me, but like, but it's worth trying. And as an example of the many people, there are many rituals that people have included in their Sedarim over the years. And especially if you have kids, the more props, the more acting out. I know some families that do a kind of a reenactment of the parting of the Red Sea in their living room with like stuffed animals. Great. Like, and for adults, for kids, whatever you can do to make this an experiential evening. I think to a large extent, if it hasn't become clear already, I believe we've lost the spirit of Passover because it's become all about the words, when like Passover is really supposed to be like something that that people in this town should get. It should be like a production, like it should be theater, it should be drama, it should be real storytelling. Okay, so there's Dayenu, and then you will find this, what I said earlier, the teaching of Rabban Gamliel that says, if you're only going to do 3 things, here it comes. There's Dayenu, Dayenu. Look at this, Rabban Gamliel's 3 things. So Rabban Gamliel was accustomed to say, anyone who has not said these 3 things on Pesach has not fulfilled his obligation, and these are them: the Pesach sacrifice, matzah, and maror. And he explains them, you can check out Rabbi Brause's class on this. I think last Wednesday she sort of went through each symbol and talked about the meaning of all these. But the point is, like, you make reference to matzah, you make reference to maror, you make reference to the paschal sacrifice. That's again an example of just what would a bare bones magid be. And it's spelled out because nothing's bare bones in this tradition. It's spelled out in great detail in the haggadah. Okay. In Magid, now this starts to get a little confusing, so just hold on to your horses here. In Magid, we also begin the first part of Hallel, which is one of the steps that we're going to get to later. So, but just so you know, and you can see it, Magid, first half of Hallel. At this point, you pick the cup up and you begin to say, and actually cover the matzah, it says, and you say, you go through these psalms. These are really just psalms of praise. How many of them you want to do, again, is sort of up to you. But it's just at the end of Magid, we sort of begin the process of reciting Hallel, which I'll explain more fully later. And then we sort of cut off, just a teaser till later, and then we raise the second cup of wine and make a blessing over the second cup of wine. The blessing here is, if you can, you can recite the whole thing. If not, you can just recite Baruch Atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael, the one who redeemed Israel. So it's like we end the Magid section with our second cup, again poured, or I guess it was poured at the beginning of Magid, so we don't have to worry about that. But again, leaning to the left as we drink it, or leaning in some way, being casual as we drink it. There's a tradition that you actually have to lean to the left, and like, of course, in the legal sources, they're trying to figure out, well, why the left? And there's some like contorted explanation of how like, oh, the way that the windpipe works, it's actually safer if you lean to the, it's just like totally bogus, like, 19th century rabbinic science. But that's the custom, is like you'll lean while drinking all of this wine. Okay. Where are we? Well, we can figure out by going back to our original song. Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz karpas yachatz magid rachza. That's where we are now. Rachza, I said earlier, was the urchatz is a hand washing, rachza is a hand washing. So it's just the same thing again. What's unusual about hand washing is that we bring the water to the table, we wash for other people. And at this point, it is as if everything I've said before. If you think about Shabbat, like on Shabbat, we make a kiddush, wash our hands, break bread, head into the meal. It's as if like there was a pause after kiddush and we went through all of these other rituals. And now these next few parts of the Seder are going to feel familiar because you're starting to get into the classic kind of forms of any ritual meal, just like the Shabbat meal. So we'll wash hands with a blessing, al netilat yadayim, and then we'll say two blessings. One is, this is motzi matzah in the song, in the Seder. This is one or two steps of the Seder. Some people combine them because it's basically the same ritual. It's just that we're going to say two blessings. The blessing hamotzi lechem min haaretz, who brings forth bread from the earth, and the blessing al achilat matzah, the one who commands us to eat matzah. So those are just two separate ideas. One is that we always make a blessing over bread as we open a meal. And the other, though, is a special, but this isn't just any old bread. This is matzah, so it's a special commandment, and we make a blessing over that as well. And the tradition is to eat, this is a classic Jewish question, like, you have to eat matzah on Passover. Oh, well, how do you know whether you fulfilled the obligation of eating matzah on Passover? Well, what constitutes eating matzah? Well, you have to eat a certain amount of matzah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the tradition is that you should eat an egg-size amount of matzah, okay? Now, that's a lot of matzah to shovel into your mouth at once, so maybe over the course of the meal, but there are definitely like funny scenes of like fiercely religious Jews trying to like attach an egg-size amount of matzah into the blessing, and so crumbs falling off and shoving it into their mouths. And I've seen it done, and it's worth it if you can ever sneak a peek. Okay, and then in the days of the temple, there would be a third blessing said at this point, which is on the Passover, the Paschal sacrifice, right, which is one of the three primary items, but it's not here. We don't say it now. Instead, Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz Magid rachza motzi matzah maror. That's in our song. Maror is the twist. I don't know. Somebody tell me the musical term for that. Maror. Maror is the bitter herb, and comes from a verse in the Torah. And they embittered their lives with hard labor. The word for embittered is the mareru. They made it bitter, and so maror is. There's a typo here. Maror is a representation of that bitterness. There are, I said before, different foodstuffs that you use for maror, but I think it should, whatever it is, it should be somewhat difficult or unpleasant. Like if it's just a piece of lettuce, right? Try to get at least down to the white part of it, like something that's like, takes a little bit of your energy to eat, because there is some idea that this is supposed to be like a representation of the difficult parts of the Exodus story. You see, the tradition is to eat an egg-sized amount of matzah and an olive-sized amount of maror. These were the basic volume units that the rabbis used, and to make it as bitter as you can possibly take, so much that you shed a tear if possible. This is another funny thing that I remember from seeing Sedarim in the old country of Brooklyn, is that like people would like shave horseradish, the root, and try to get like a really powerful one, and then eat an olive-sized amount, and it would be like, people would be like nearly barfing at the, like crying like that, and that was like, wow, look at how religious I am, I'm suffering. So okay, fine. Okay, let's move. I'm just reading some of the comments here. You can pop in and ask questions at any time, although people have not done so. But if there are any confusions or comments, please feel free. Okay. Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz magid rachza motzi matzah maror korech. Okay, this is a cool one. Korech means like binding something together, and that's because this is like a little sandwich. In fact, this may be the invention of the sandwich, and that is another thing that we could triumphantly attribute to Jewish genius, the sandwich. That's a joke, not a good one. The sandwich is called the Hillel sandwich, not our Hillel, but the original Hillel had a custom of, because the verse says in Exodus, they shall eat the meat that night, roasted over fire with matzah and maror shall they eat it. The verse says, eat it with matzah and maror. So he used to have this, and it sounds like a nice little sandwich. You'd have like a little maror, a little lamb, and you put it in matzah and you'd eat it together. We don't have the lamb anymore, the Paschal sacrifice. People usually put haroset into the sandwich. But the idea is to experience all of the symbols of Passover at once, all of the dichotomous symbols, some of liberation, some of oppression, to sort of taste all of that in one bite. Okay. So that's one of the rituals, the korech. There's a little recitation for it, but there's no special blessing for it. So here are the blessings of motzi and matzah, maror korech. In memory of the temple, according to Hillel, this is what Hillel would do when the temple existed. So you can say this, that's the recitation, but there's no blessing here, okay? And now, Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz magid rachza motzi matzah maror korech shulchan orech. Okay, this is, if magid is the most important part of the Seder, this is certainly the most favorite part of the Seder. It's the meal, and that is actually one of the steps of the Seder, is to eat the meal. Shulchan orech means a laid out table. So it's time to eat. And you can just like pause now, settle into it. Most of your work is done at this point. There are a few customs afterwards, but at this point you've done a lot of work and you get your reward. And you begin the Seder. It's customary to begin the Seder with an egg. You can imagine lots of different reasons given for why the egg is a symbol of birth, the rebirth. But I'll leave that for other interpreters. But that's custom, and of course there are lots of other classic customs like matzo ball soup and stuff like that. But as I said, the original law was that the Seder had to be finished by chatzot, by midnight. I made fun here of the Brauslight Rake Seder, which finishes at 2 a.m., because the truth is, it's also become a custom to totally ignore this custom. And even in the most traditional sectors of Judaism, you will find Seders that go on till 6 in the morning, and there's just something about like the passion and excitement around Seder that is so obviously better than any other rule that we have, that the law to have to eat it by midnight is generally ignored. Some people stick to it, but I mention it because that leads us into Tzafun, the Afikomen. All right, I'm pausing again. Does anyone have any questions? No. Okay. All right. Oh, I hear a question.
Is the Paschal lamb the lamb they slaughtered to put lamb's blood on their door, or is it the later custom at the temple to slaughter the lamb?
Yeah, it's both. It's there was a Passover in Egypt, and I want to say I'm not sure how to answer your question in the most specific. Like, was it the same lamb, the blood on the door, and the Paschal sacrifice? I can't remember whether that's so. But so that's a great question. Maybe if someone knows the answer, they can shut it up. But there was a Paschal sacrifice in the first Passover, but then it becomes an official temple sacrifice once they've arrived in the land of Israel many years later. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is the egg not on the Seder plate?
The egg is on the Seder plate. Well, there is an egg on the Seder plate, but you probably, because the egg. I like it because it's called the egg, not just egg. But yeah, the egg is on the Seder plate, but you probably, if you want it to be, you should also just like hard boil a bunch if you want it to be distributed. But yes, the egg is on the Seder plate. I actually don't know how they decided what goes on the Seder plate, like what made it there. And of course, having said that, we can also mention the latest addition to the Seder plate, which is the orange. I don't know if everyone has a custom of putting an orange on your Seder plate, but it derives from I don't know, like a story about a conversation that like they were going to start ordaining women at JTS, I think, and someone said, "Oh, the day that we ordain women, it's like, or ordaining women, and it's like having an orange on the Seder plate, you know, like ridiculous." Yeah. So then, of course, like, you know, people start, okay, yeah, people start putting an orange on the Seder plate. It's like, it's so funny because like, you could have just, if you were trying to be, snarky like that, you could have just said bread on the Seder plate and then nobody could have done it. But an orange, it's like, yeah, sure, we'll be happy to put one on. Rabbi Zaki,
it's really about having conversation.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it's about LGBTQ and all that stuff. So with one of my classes, we thought about what would be a generate conversation. Well, we came up with a slinky. So what does a slinky represent? And how does that work? And it's really profound. It's spiritual because it has this movement. It could go up, it could go down, it could do all that stuff. And so it's having something that we really talk about. Exactly.
I love it. Thank you, Rabbi Zaki. That's exactly right. This is like a rare occasion where I can, like, you know, completely seriously say, yes, put a slinky on your Seder plate. That's a great idea. That's a great way to provoke conversation at the Seder, and it is exactly that sort of the orange. In some ways, as you're suggesting, can lead us in lots of different directions. I hear someone else in the chat saying it's a symbol for queer inclusion. These symbols are, if nothing else, meant to make us say, wait, pay attention. Something different is going on here, right? That's what the whole Seder is meant to do. So beautiful. Any other questions before we move into the last pieces of the Seder? Okay, so Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz maggi idrachza motzi matzah maror korech shulchan orech tzafun. All right, tzafun it should be called afikomen, but it's called safun, meaning hidden, because the afikomen has been hidden. I'd be curious to hear if there are various customs around it, but in my family, the idea was that my father would find a way to hide the afikomen, and then at this point we would go running around looking for it, and then whoever found it could hold it as ransom to my father. And it's like, I don't want the anti-Semites to get a hold of this custom, but it's like you could ransom him in order to get a gift out of him so that he could complete the ritual, and it could be like up to $100. It's like, very, very cool for kids, little like grubby little kids. But yeah, that's just one of the ways that the idea there is like my like father needs the afikomen to be able to distribute it to the guests, and so I as a kid am sort of holding him hostage in order. But the reason that it has that, it's fun and it involves the kids, but the reason it has that feeling of actual ransom is because the afikomen is supposed to be the last thing that we eat Seder night after the meal. This takes us to like what the meaning of afikomen is, which like clearly seems to be a Greek word. Some have said that it means dessert. I will now share with you the wildest theory that I have heard, which some of you have probably heard before, but since we've got adults only on this call, I think, which is that the afikomen, this is the Seder was modeled on the Greek symposium, and they would have a big meal. And then afikomen is some reference to an orgy, because they would have an orgy after the meal in ancient Greek and Roman times. And so this is like, but then it's like, it's like a wild theory and kind of fun, but like, then it's like, what, and we replace that with like a little crumpled piece of matzah, like somehow we got that, either that's not the right derivation, or we didn't quite channel the appropriate energy there, but fair enough. The afikomen is, could mean dessert in Greek, could mean something after, okay? But the idea is that we eat the afikomen, once it's found, we eat the afikomen, everybody gets a little piece. If you need to, don't get stressed out if there's only enough matzah for some of your guests. I mean, I guess the presumption here is that people aren't gonna have a ton of guests. But you can mix it up with other matzah if you need to. It is after all symbolic. Okay, gonna keep singing our song. Kadesh urchatz karpatz yachatz maggi rachza motzi matzah maror korech shulchan orech tafun barech. Okay, this is where you start to lose people. Okay, just FYI, anyone who's like, a nerdy Jew that loves doing this stuff and has invited people out, like, or is working with anyone who's like less familiar. At this point, it's like people ate a meal. It's harder. It gets harder and harder to pull them in. So the next thing in the Seder is Barech, which means Birkat Hamazon, which follows our Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after the meals that follows all of our ritual meals, all of our meals that include breaking bread. I'll show you just how it looks. What happened? I'll show you just how it looks in here. The standard, call and response, and the standard blessing. You do fill up the third cup of water before Barech. Water. Third cup of wine before Barech, before this, and you go through this whole thing, and then after the blessing, you say another Borei Pri Hagafen and drink the third cup of wine. Now, your crowd may not be like we're going to say the whole Barech crowd. There are some very, very short formulations, which I'm happy to share with you. Brich Rachmana Malka de Alma Mare de Hai Pita. We sometimes sing at Ikar, and it's just like a kind of a 6-word blessing. There's some kind of moment of blessing, thanking for the food, gives you an opportunity to drink your third cup of wine. After Barech, after the blessing after the meals, there is the third cup of wine, and then there is a bunch of things happening, some of which are cool and some of which people are a little uneasy about. What's cool is that we often pour a cup for Elijah, either after the blessing or beforehand. My family, we used to have this massive cup like in the middle of the table, and then someone goes and opens the door at the end of Barech, and Elijah comes in, and my father used to like sort of like, you know, maybe it worked the first time, but it was sort of obvious, but he would like knock the table so that like some juice would spill out so that, oh, Elijah's here and drinking. Okay, so that was like a fun thing. What's not so fun is that as the wine spilled out, the classic recitation here is Shvo chamatcha, pour your wrath upon the nations that did not know you and upon the kingdoms that did not call upon your name. This is, if you're in the like liberal Jewish, whoa, this theology is very, what do you call it? Not universalistic. What's the opposite of particular, not just particularistic, but mean particularistic. This may be a part of the Seder that you've kind of moved beyond, you skip. If you want to find meaning in it, I think it is worth noting that this is an expression of a people who have endured a lot through history, both in this story and for the rest of history, and there's trauma and anger there. And there was earlier a moment in the Seder where we had compassion for our enemies. This is highlighting a different sort of part of the Jewish traumatic experience where we feel real anger at what's going on. So, you know, that's worth a discussion for at least, though it may not be the thing that you're so super keen to highlight in your Seder. Okay. Kadesh urchatz karpas yachatz magid rachza motzi matzah maror korech shulchan orech safun barech hallel. Okay, this is the second to last here. We say this barech, the blessing, the cup for Elijah, and then we started this at the end of Magid, but we move into Hallel. Now, this is a very weird thing that we do. Hallel is a prayer that is said on a lot of the holidays. Hallel means praise, and it's a song of praise that has some of the classic Hallelujah Psalms in it. And we say it in synagogue on holidays during the day, standing up. Okay, I mention all of those things because they're all different here, right? Like, this is the only time we say Hallel in our homes. This is the only time, certainly, that we say Hallel all broken up. We don't have a special blessing for Hallel. This is the only time that we say Hallel at night. And this is the only time that we say Hallel sitting down. So, Manishtana Laila Zeh, one of the things that's very different about this night is Hallel. And you know, I like the idea that this is a really home-based holiday. Like, this is a holiday on our terms and on our turf. And so there's a sense that even like our great praising of God, we can sort of do it as we're relaxing, sitting down, like God's in our house now, and we're sort of like, the whole thing feels a lot more casual than Hallel usually does. So, and again, if you're the kind of person that is, or you have a kind of crowd that is not going to get through the entire Hallel, so then just as with Barech, the blessing after the meals, it's nice to have some acknowledgement of thanks for the meals. So too, pick out a part here or just take a moment to express praise to God, right? Like, maybe you won't read all of these Psalms, but maybe one of them really speaks to you. Halu et Adonai kol hagoyim. There's a universalist theme. All nations will worship God together. On and on and on. But there's a whole Hallel here. It definitely taxes the patience for those who are, you know, either uninitiated or just tired at this point. There is a fourth cup of wine that we have filled for Hallel. Okay, that's where the 4 cups of wine. There was one at the beginning of the meal. There was one in the beginning of Magid that got drank at the end of Magid. There was one at the beginning of Barech that got drunk at the end of Barech. And there's one at the beginning of Hallel that gets the fourth cup of wine gets drank, I think, drunk at the end of Hallel here. Again, reclining to the left. Okay, and then we're about to finish our song. Okay, so Kadesh Urchatz Karpas Yachatz Magid Rachza Motzi Matzah Maror Korech Shulchan Orech Zafun Barech Hallel Nirtza. Okay, Nirtza means conclusion. It has come to an end, and hopefully in a good way. So the Seder is concluded with the phrase L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Next year, may it be in Jerusalem, which is an expression, and of course there's all kinds of singing, L'shana haba, L'shana haba, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Let me screen share here into our little sheet. So L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, and it really is an important, here I'll also show you what it says in, this is the famous phrase, you don't have to recite it exactly, but Chasal Sidur Pesach Kihilchato, completed is the Seder of Pesach according to its law, according to all, we've done all the rituals, we've gone through the Seder, et cetera, and then, and then bring us close, lead us to the plantings, the sapling, redeemed to Zion and joy. You can recite this or not, but this part is the real conclusion, and it is some expression of desire that, that we eventually reach the final redemption, which clearly still have not done. Even though we could theoretically celebrate the Passover Seder in Jerusalem next year, there's still some sense that Jerusalem represents a world that remains unredeemed, and it's a good moment to talk about what kind of liberation, what kind of redemption we hope for in the coming year. After that, that's it. Ta-da! We did we'll sing one last time. You can sing with me. Kadesh Urchatz Karpas Yachatz Magid Rachza Motzi Matzah Maror Korech Shulchan Orech Zafun Barech Hallel Nirtza. And then, of course, there are all of these songs, which for some people is just the best. I'm a little weary at this point, but like, you know, some of the classics, haggadah and Kilo Na'eh, Adir Hu, here's a classic. Echad mi yodea echad, right? So, you know, the nerds among us will be, you know, singing songs for the rest of the evening. But that's it. Like that is, you know, Chasil Sidur Pesach Kihilchato. We've completed the Seder of Pesach according to its laws and rituals. So that's it. That's pretty much the Seder. And yeah, and now I just wanted to open it up for questions. Hopefully that is enough to give us a sense of like one by one how we would move through a Seder together. Hopefully it doesn't feel so daunting, especially, which I said at the beginning, the middle, at the end, especially when you take into account that most of these things just take like a minute or two. The thing that takes a long time is magid, and really that should be the funnest part. That should be the part where you have like a real conversation, you just really talk about it with people. And if you're alone this year, like I will be, then like, the tradition says that you should ask yourself the question, what is different about this night? And then answer the question. And I think they even mean that you should ask yourself out loud and then answer out loud. I don't know if that feels too weird, but it does speak to the idea that like, as I will do this year, you should, you know, spend the evening thinking about, reading about, we have different practices around Passover, but I know some of you, you know, write on, journal about, art about, whatever it is your way of telling out the story of Egypt. That's the point, is really getting, and some, you know, just read the book of Exodus. That's a good one. So there are lots of ways, but if you're lucky enough to have one other person, then it's already a dialogue. And so be in dialogue. Yeah. Okay. Questions. Yeah, Rabbi Zach.
On the second night, we count the Omer.
Thank you.
I actually journal each of the Sphirot within the Sphirot. That's a whole complicated conversation for many, but I actually look at myself so that by the time I receive my own Torah, I've really dug deep into it. So it's a great time for journaling for me, and just and I do that in line with when I'm counting.
Beautiful.
So I'm just throwing that out it's one of my favorite practices during Passover.
That's so great. It's good to have another rabbi on the call. Because I always forget this, and actually I have literally forgotten it the first night. So there's a custom of counting the Omer, which is a process of counting the days between Passover and Shavuot, a period of 7 weeks at the end of which they would bring the first grain offering, like that had been just sprouting in the spring season of Passover. We record that journey in a sort of a spiritual way. Rabbi Zaki was saying, it's become almost a Kabbalistic journey where every day represents a different sort of force in the world. It's a great time to do reflection. But anyway, the way that it is performed is that every night, starting not the first night of Passover, but the second night of Passover, we count the Omer. And it is in most haggadot, but it's way at the end, and it's on the second night. And I tell you, I've gotten burned so many times with this mitzvah, because the idea is that if you miss a day, then you can't say the blessings for the rest of the day. But that first day is on the second Seder, when I've already probably hinted enough that by the time you get to Barech and Hallel, I'm sort of bored and heading off to do my own thing. So I end up forgetting to say it and ruining everything, and I don't have the reminder on my phone because I'm not using my phone, and now I'm just complaining. But thank you for reminding us all, Rabbi Zaki, that gets said on the second night. Other questions or just additions, things we didn't get to, contributions? Anything else? All right. Then I won't try to end up with any kind of flair or flourish or deepen, because the point was just to keep things really practical and to give you your Andrea, if you would, if you're still there, just give people the links to the two sheets again so that you just have them. They're meant to be, and the URL, and she's asked me to share the link to the Safaria page I was using, which I will do as well. Right here, because this is a very useful thing. I'll end though by saying that we are also trying to make it possible so that you are as connected as you can be. Okay, so hold on. Andrea's just linked us to the first source, which is the Seder kind of ingredients guide. And then she's about to link us to the second one, and then I'll link you to this. There's the second one. And then here is the haggadah in Safaria. Okay. Not Safari, but Safaria. Be cool to be able to go on Safaria right now, but I don't think that's happening. Okay. So there it is. We are trying to, these sessions were meant to prep you so that now you can just do it on your own and be, lead your own Seder, and hopefully we've empowered you in that way. But people have all different kinds of practices. Like I won't be able to join with the Zoom Seders because it's my practice not to be online during the holiday, but some of you don't have that, don't observe that. And so we have all kinds of Zoom opportunities to have Seder with other people. There's all kinds of Seder matching. So if you're alone and you want to just zoom into someone's Seder in our people are like so disappointed that they don't have people guests at their Seder table. You're doing them a favor by asking to be linked in with a Seder. So please take that opportunity on the first night, and then on the second night, Hillel is leading a kind of a musical tour through the Haggadah, which will be a kind of an all Ikar Zoom. So if you're someone who's online during the holidays, that's also an opportunity. So hopefully you're well armed to head into this very strange Passover. I guess, I said I wouldn't end on a flourish, but a rabbi can't help himself. I will just say that there is, on some basic level, this is a really difficult Passover to be undertaking, and some of us are really in really difficult situation. But it's also true that there's something very Passover about this Passover. Like there's so many ways in which what we're going through this year, being like in our house while a plague is going on outside, hoping to be spared within, an irrational and incompetent leader at the helm, and just purging our house of all contaminants and making sure that we're clean and that we stay alive. Like there's a lot about this Passover that feels so relevant in a way that it never has before. So it's really sad in some ways not to be able to join with our families, but there's also a real spiritual opportunity here. So I hope that we can find something really deep and new in this telling. There should be something new, something discovered in each telling of the Passover story. That's why it looks a little different at every table. So I think that's it. If there are no last questions, then we managed to do our 2-hour session in an hour and 35. Not bad. All right. Happy Passover, everyone, and I will see you, some of you online in the next few days, and hopefully in person, I don't know, one of these years, right? All right, love you all. Bye.